Hello, I'm Christian, and welcome to the Jamoir Leadership Podcast, a show where we talk about effective collaboration, influence, and leadership in an increasingly complex world. My interview partner is Dr. Dirk Schlimm. Dirk is an international leadership expert and the author of Influencing Powerful People. The purpose of this podcast is to share ideas and stimulate discussion, and it does not constitute professional advice of any kind. If such advice is needed, the services of a competent professional should be sought. The speakers, host, and Jamoir International Incorporated are not to be held responsible for any use, misuse, or reuse of the content. Enjoy the show. Hello, welcome back to the Jamoir Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Christian, and I'm so pleased to bring you right now Part 2 of our two-part interview series with Mr. Bernd Christmas K.C. We started this conversation already in a Part 1, so if you haven't caught that, please go back and listen to it. Well worth your time, but then make sure to come right back to this one. Dirk and Bernd are going to continue their conversation, and then I'm going to jump in at the end and really get some of Mr. Christmas's ideas and truly advice when it comes to emerging leaders facing difficult situations. So let's dive in.
Bernd, you've also, you Christian gave us the intro here and talked about many things that you've done in your life, and I just want to touch on one more different context here. So you were appointed by Canadian Prime Minister Chrétien to work on international commissions. So you have been involved in international relations, public policies, or whole other areas. So what have you learned on negotiation in the world of politics, international relations, and what sounds like the big world, like the kind of thing almost that they teach? You mentioned this Harvard course at the Kennedy School. It looks like you had experience in those kind of settings also.
No, I've learned. What I've learned is that there's lots of people, the world is big, and there's still, despite that, there's still, unique silos of views on certain things. When I was involved with the International Commission on tuna, conservation of tuna for the Atlantic Ocean, I traveled all over the world as a commissioner and got involved in some pretty serious discussions on how do you get, say, the artisanal fishery involved in a country versus the, so-called air quotes developed fisheries. And then there's some countries that, were, being blocked because, the bigger ones have been doing this forever. I.e. countries like Japan or United States or European Union, and they didn't want, say, Mexico or China or Brazil involved in the fishery. You learn that there's, competing interests, and, there's, what I've learned is that it basically boils down to that some of the things that I've learned from my ancestry and notions passed down that could be utilized in these type of scenarios, and try to make it fair. And then sometimes you have to fight a fight, and other times you kind of just have to back off and let things naturally flow as the scenario develops, and then you wait for the opening to jump in and say, okay, I like to have this inserted into a certain type of agreement. This is based on sort of like what I viewed from an international perspective. And then dealing with countries, businesses from different countries, I always hope that people that are from, United States or from Europe or from East Indian countries or Middle East, when they come to our neck of the woods, that they at least have looked into who we are and what we've done, what's our history. Because I would do the same thing to learn about them and say, Asian, you go to China, someone gives you a business card. That's a really good example. Most people are familiar. You give them a business card, they give you a business card, you're supposed to look at it. You don't just, stuff it in your shirt pocket. So, when they come to our territory, you hope that they will, in some fashion, recognize that protocol, means that you potentially bring an offering to the chief or the representative of the chief and say, thank you for inviting us into your territory, just as a sign of respect. So again, that's the sort of things that I've kind of recognized and learned over the years in dealing with different people from different backgrounds. And yeah, as you guys know, it's a very diverse. The globe, the world is a very diverse group of humans. That you say something wrong in one context, you potentially, if you're doing business with them, you'll never do business with them ever again. So you got to be aware.
Yeah, no. Thanks for that, Bernd. And I think with all the global diversity that we're talking about and people diversity, but respect is such a universal value, and I think you highlighted that, and just understanding how I'm being respectful to people, that also that it's not taken the wrong way. But I want to just quickly get one last question for me, and before Christian, turn it over to you right after, because again. I thought it was interesting in your answer. You have stressed trust, community, relationship building, but then I heard you. Once in a while, you also have to be assertive a little bit. You have to know what you want, and you have to get in there because now I want something. And so, that's my last question. So it's really the negotiation repertoire, if you will, of being empathetic on one side and understanding and consensus and all the things we love to hear. But then there's also time to be assertive and stand up for what you want and have that clarity also. If I can just get you to comment on being able to do both, and as you said, knowing what to do when, how important that is.
Yeah, that's a good point. And nothing is as smooth and funny as sometimes I've described. And again, there's I'll use it in the context of the negotiations I've been involved in on behalf of tribes, and again, I could use my own or some new ones that or other places, but one time I remember we were dealing with ExxonMobil and Maritimes Northeast Pipeline, and they wanted to build what they called the stable gas platforms off of Atlantic Canada, Nova Scotia. ExxonMobil, big global, one of the largest oil gas companies in the world. And they came into town, and they had their lawyers and all their people from all over the world, saying stuff to us, and we kept asserting that, we have certain rights, and we believe you need to consult with us. And so they, for a year, I kid you not, for a year, we had these meetings on how we would get involved in the stable gas platforms from a, human resources perspective, business perspective, and same with the pipeline, how we would cross our traditional territories. And then what they did was, behind our back, they went and sought permits and approvals, and from the government bodies, who also believe that, make it look like you're dealing with the tribal people, and as long as you made it look like you did something, we're good. So they had, I remember it was like in December of a particular year. I think it was like 1999 or something like that. In fact, I got the days correct, or 2001, one of them years correct. And they came and announced in the offices that, oh yeah, by the way, we got our permits, and so we still want to talk to you about stuff. Like, but you can tell like there's things. Wow, we don't really have to talk to you anymore, but we're willing to talk. And we all kind of said, oh yeah, okay. Well, we all got up, and our lawyers that were representing us on this particular file, we filed an injunction. Against the projects, filed an injunction against the Canadian, God, it used to be called the Energy Board for issuing these permits. And within a week, the Federal Court of Canada said, yep, it's stopped. The injunction's been granted. And I kid you not, within 1 week, after that, we had a deal with this company. It was over. That just shows you sometimes you have to, hit hard with the what I call in my world, hit hard, meaning with legal action. The Marshall decision on fishing was the same thing too. The federal government of Canada and Justice Canada said, no, they don't have any treaty rights. We're right. We're correct. They don't have to be regulated by us. So we went all to the Supreme Court, because we had to use the hammer, and the Supreme Court sided with us and said, no, they have the commercial right to fish. First time ever of any Indigenous group, next to the Maori in the world. So yeah, sometimes you have to know when to come in hard, and sometimes you know when to hold them, as the song goes, and kind of stop yourself, because again, it goes back to in this crazy scenario on those two sides that I explained to you, they created tension, but then the relationship, you start bringing the relationship back. Like as I first described in the first part of the program, is trying to get the communities, despite the fact that we had every right to be angry and just go crazy, we still had to consider the governments who were, two-faced towards us, and corporations and other stakeholders. You got to still work with them eventually for the next, 100, 200, 500, 1,000 years. So you might as well, bite the bullet, so to speak, and not do what they've done to you. So it's always a fine line, as you can imagine, Dirk.
No, so Bernd, and I'm so glad we brought out both here, right? So and I think that's so important to understand in a negotiation. Sometimes you have to walk away, or you walk away for a moment, or as you're saying, I'm doing something that is a bit harder hitting, because otherwise, people don't understand that my collaborative approach. Please don't mistake that for I'm not able to do that. So I'm glad we heard that from you also, so that we had the two. The two sides here, and really that repertoire of being able to do both, depending on what the situation calls for. So I'm done with my list of questions. I know, Christian, you have been waiting to get in there. Thanks for waiting patiently. So I'm going to turn it over for Christian's for a couple of questions.
Yeah, no, thanks, Dirk, and thanks, Bernd. That was a wonderful conversation to listen into. Definitely a lot of stuff resonated with me, starting with thinking about consensus, reaching a consensus in negotiation, all the way to standing firm and going with the flow. That was wonderful. And on the podcast, that's something we always go for, being practical. And I like to hold myself up as an example, someone who's in academics, where similar conversations, but often very different. But thinking about negotiation, I'm already imagining how this conversation applied to working as a PhD candidate with a committee above me that I answer to, all the way to being a very, very junior professor working with an administration, and sometimes having different objectives or priorities. And I really appreciate, of course, Bernd, bringing in the Indigenous factor as a Canadian. I know recently at a lot of schools, just the negotiations and the policy changes around bringing in knowledge keepers into oral examinations was a very big conversation. So, and I imagine there will be a lot more like that. But anyway, I could go on about everything I learned. I have a couple of questions here. And the first one, Bernd, just thinking about everything you said Very helpful, very practical. But I'm wondering if we could just maybe bring out a couple of major principles or practices that you might suggest to emerging leaders who are listening to this conversation from different parts of the world, and maybe just one or two skills that you think are absolutely necessary to develop early in one's career when it comes to negotiation, if you have an idea of one or two things.
Yeah, I guess on the top of mind is probably knowing how to read the room, meaning you need to know who you're representing, obviously, but you also need to know who you're going to be trying to bring into the fold. And so you need to know that, and you have to take time to investigate and do some research. Like you just can't walk in and say, yeah, we want $100 million because you've extracted X amount from our lands. You go into a place and say, well, I'm going to look at their financial statements that are published by, the New York Stock Exchange or whatever, and say, oh, I see that this year you made over, $500 billion on this particular mine. So, you use that information. So instead of asking for 100 million, you're asking for, 500 million as an example. So it's about knowing what your tools are and what your leverage points are, and then maybe also getting to know the personalities of the people. That definitely is, it's basically, and then of course you need to know, do you have the, the mandate? You need to know the people you're representing. Do you have the proper mandate? Because if you don't have the mandate from those individuals, and you're kind of going off on a tangent, that just creates chaos later, because someone will say, well, we didn't tell you to go ask for a 500 million. We just wanted 100 million, and everything else. So, and then, that might be surprising, say, well, when you want more, and sometimes they don't. But you need to know that. You need to know who you're with, and who's and in a different way, who's watching your back or has your back if something goes wrong. So that definitely is a big thing for me. And what else would there be? I don't know. Ultimately, you got to be secure and confident in who you are, not to the point where you're egotistical and being rude or being, a jerk, if I can use that word. You got to be, respectful, honorable, but being confident at the same time. And if there's, again, I know that's a fine balance, and a lot of people read confidence as being, you think you're too good, or you're this and that. It's all about perceptions. But you got to make sure that you've got your mandates, but then you also you can say, yeah, we want 100 million. That's what we want. And you have to say that in such a way that no one doesn't see you're faltering. Oh, maybe he doesn't really want 100 million. Maybe he only wants 20 million. I'm just using those numbers as an example, because it's not always about money. But you got to make sure that this show what's important, and be confident in that, expressing those things. That's probably the two big things would be know your the people you're representing, and know at the same time know who your counterparties are, and then personally be very confident and secure in who you are as an individual. And as you know, there's lots of techniques to build that up. Lots of different ways that people do that. Maybe I feel this way because things is just, I've always been this way ever since I've been young, and it's just, I just know I'm comfortable in my brain and my body.
Right. No, that those are wonderful pieces of advice for emerging leaders. And just thinking about that, what you said, where you mentioned finding that balance between being confident and egotistical, I think that that's such an important thing, and a place perhaps where not only would an emerging leader or a young professional need practice, but just hearing how you described it and thinking about your journey, that's a place where a mentor would be likely helpful to help guide an emerging leader in getting that feedback, where it might be hard to see for ourselves, or whether it's evaluating a room and knowing both sides. I imagine a lot of that comes with experience, and better to start practicing as soon as possible. So those are wonderful pieces of advice. Thank you so much, Bernd. Dirk, I think that answers my question there, and I think that answers it in a very helpful way, that it might be good to wrap it up here, unless Dirk, you had a final thought or a final question?
I've enjoyed the interview. So many good thoughts. I was looking forward to it, Bernd, and now it's even more interesting than I thought. So really, thank you so much. It's been a huge pleasure speaking with you.
Well, I appreciate the time you've given me to share my thoughts, and it's been an enjoyable time. I thank you for those. Let me speak my view.
Thank you so much. All right, and another big thank you to Mr. Christmas. That was such an amazing conversation. I certainly learned a lot, and I hope that you, our listeners, also learned a lot and are able to take away and apply some of the information that Bernd shared with us in today's discussion. As always, we're so delighted to have amazing guests on the Genware Leadership Podcast, but we're also so delighted and so grateful to hear from our audience, our listeners, what you're thinking. If you have any questions, any comments, any suggestions, or just encouragement, we take it all. So please feel free to reach out to us. We have an email, that's podcast@genware.com. So please reach out, podcast@genware.com. We'd love to hear from you. And until our next episode and our next interview, take care.